Hi, I'm Everett. Welcome back to the shop. This time we've actually got something a little different. It's not machining this time, it's actually automotive work. My in-laws have a 2007 Honda Accord, 100,000 K on it, about, well, I guess it'd be what, 63,000 miles, something like that. And it's due for a timing belt. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a timing belt, water pump, idlers, all that fun stuff. It's a few hours worth of a job, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit the highlights of going in, what to look for, a little trick that I was taught when I worked for Honda about 16, 17 years ago. And yeah, so I'll just show you the basic steps of what I went through. And hopefully, I mean, I know not everybody out there drives a Honda, but I'm hoping that it can be of some use to anybody who's got one, and if you have to do a timing belt on it. For those of you who watch my channel at all, or any length of time, you'll know that I'm an automotive mechanic by trade, so this video is actually not machining. I've gotten the timing belt and water pump kit for it, some brand new coolant because it is 10 years old. First things first, I'm going to have to drain the coolant. I put it up on blocks so the wheels are off the ground. I'll have to pull this tire and the inner fender liner on this side. Got the front, well, fascia, or not fascia, but skid shield out of it. It's got those nasty little push pins on it. Got the right front tire off of it to access inside there. What I want to do for my next step is actually loosen off the crank pulley bolt, which is that guy there. Those crank pulley bolts are fairly infamous for being ridiculously tight. When I used to work for Honda many long years ago, they were miserably tight then. I suspect they still are. I have the special tool for it, and we're going to get set up and try to crack that thing loose. Before I bring out the big bar, I'm just going to see if I'm going to get lucky. My compressor isn't super strong, but nope, not gonna happen. So this is where the special tool comes in. Actually bought one just for this job. Kind of funny, I worked for Honda for how many years and never bought one. And now I'm doing one of these jobs in my garage on my hands and knees, and I had to buy one. So it fits into the 50 millimeter hex that's inside that center hub of the crankshaft dampener. I have the tool matched into the hex in the crank dampener. It's connected to a 1/2 inch flex handle, which is wedged up against the suspension. I have my other 1/2 inch breaker bar here with a bit of an extension on it. See if this is enough to crack it loose. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna have to try something different here. Give me a minute. So, a wise man once told me, never force it, just get a bigger hammer. Well, in this case, you're gonna get a bigger wrench. Dig out the 3/4. Dig out the 3/4 inch ratchet. I nicknamed this one Bertha in my toolbox, and yeah, I've also got it braced up here against some blocking, so as I push down, the force is actually less likely to take the socket off center. Wow. Yeah, those are, I remember them being tight. I'm going to put some safety glasses on in case this thing lets loose. I remember them being tight, but this is ridiculous. Oh, there we go. She's loose now. Wow. So now, theoretically, I should be able to pull my special tool back out. This is now loose. I'm not going to take the bolt out yet. I just wanted to get it loose while the engine was still in its normal engine mount. Later on in the procedure, we're going to have to take the engine mount off. Now I can safely remove the serpentine belt, and this 14mm socket goes on the tensioner. Camera is just in the right spot to try to get in my way for moving the wrench. There we go. Sometimes having the proper tools helps. These serpentine belt wrenches are, they're only 15-20 bucks, depending on where you get them. Well worth it. So now I can pull the serpentine belt off. Now while we're in here, let's have a look at this belt. See a few little shiny bits in the bottom where a little bit of dirt or gravel or whatever's gotten sucked in there. But flipping it back, a few little micro cracks on the surface. The belt profile looks okay. I don't feel much of a ridge with my finger as far as feeling for wear. I'm going to reuse this one. The serpentine belt tensioner sits against the block, mounted up that way. It has one main bolt through the center, another bolt going through the bottom, going into the block. Just checking here. That feels pretty good. That sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty good. We're going to reuse the tensioner. What I also found was that by moving the power steering reservoir to the side, it was easier to get out. Next step is I think I want to pull the upper covers, and then I can pull that dampener and pull the lower cover. Okay, front upper cover's off. Here we go. Little bolts are inside there. There's the left head cam sprocket. And looking at it, the timing belt actually looks like it's still in pretty good shape, but again, car's 10 years old, well 11 actually, 11 years old, and got 100,000 K, so we're doing this as a preventive maintenance thing. Now, while the front upper timing cover was fairly easy to get at, the rear upper timing cover for the right hand head is going to be a little stinkier. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to sit here and have you watch me do every wrench turn, because that's going to be mostly hand tools there. To make a bit more room for both that and for when I have to pull the engine mount, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the power steering pump. It's not really that hard. There's a bolt on the back, there's a bolt there, there's a bolt down underneath, and then I can hopefully flip this whole pump and hose and everything up behind or up on top of the engine. If I can do that, that buys me a bit more space, and it looks like there's enough slack in the hoses I can do this without disconnecting the system. Well, it wasn't super bad, but I will admit getting, there's a bolt in the very back bottom there that's really close to the strut tower here and the brake lines. That one was a little bit of a turd to get at, but with the power steering pump out of the way, that helps. And actually it's coming along fairly well, all things considered, thankfully. Next step is I'll pull the crank bolt and pull the dampener. Well, actually I'm going to set it to top dead center first, then pull the crank bolt and the dampener, then we'll take off the lower cover. Okay, so what I've done is I've roughly lined up the engine up top with the timing marks on the camshaft sprockets. So now it might bump it a little bit, but here we go. That guy there gets really tight. Yeah, she slides right off. I remember that. From when I worked for Honda. I mean, that was what, 16, 17 years ago. But I remembered that the bolts on the crankshafts were very tight. Once you got it loose, then the crank pulley itself just came right off. That's nice. So we have the bolts here, some more further up to hold this lower cover in place. As well, I'm going to have to remove the engine mount in order to get this thing out of here and get access to things. So here's a view from the top side. Just got the engine cover or front timing cover off. See where all the bolt holes are. It's really not that hard to get into. Once you get the dampener off, the one washer that sits on the crankshaft itself comes out. That sits next to the timing belt. The next step is I'm going to have to support the engine from underneath with a block of wood and a floor jack. We have to take this engine mount out because I'm not just doing the timing belt, I'm also going to change the water pump while I'm in here. It's kind of a normal maintenance item. You do them at the same time because the timing belt is actually what drives the water pump on these engines. And the last thing we need is to have a bad water pump bearing, wreck the belt and then turn this into a boat anchor. The upper engine mount, we have one little bolt there. It's an M6, 10 millimeter head. That is for a ground strap. These two 14 millimeter head ones bolt it to the bracket, and then these two big guys bolt it to the subframe rail. That one there, for some reason, has a fair amount of corrosion on the one, whereas the other one's not as bad. I'm not sure why, but I'm going to clean that up before it goes in. The next step is the lower engine mount. You see I've already got it loose. There's one little bolt here to hold the wiring harness, and then there are three 14 millimeter head bolts that go through this bracket into the block. There's one here, one at the bottom, and then there's one that actually takes a little bit to find, but it's right under here. I can put my finger right on the head there. I've already got it loose. I'll just finish spinning it out and then bring you back in. It seems like lighting is always a bit of a trick, trying to get things visible for people to see on the camera. Just because our eyes have such a wide dynamic range and cameras have a narrower one. So now that we have that bracket off, you can now see the timing belt, the whole circuit it runs, where we start down here at the crankshaft sprocket, and as the belt rotates, it's moving this way, right? So it's moving up past the tensioner. There's a hydraulic plunger behind this guy with it. I'll show you that after. Goes up to here, runs around the right-hand head or rear head cam sprocket, down underneath. The water pump has a smooth pulley on it, up around the front cam sprocket or left-hand head, down past an idler, and then back down underneath, and makes that continual loop every time the engine turns. There's a procedure for setting up the timing in the service manual, but there's also a little trick that one of the guys back at Honda when I was an apprentice showed me. Now Randy, he's probably still there. I haven't talked to him in years. Randy was really cool. I learned a lot of cool stuff from him when I was working at Honda. And so what he actually wound up showing me was if you take a paint marker, once you get your timing marks and everything set, all the marks are set where they should be according to the service manual. So what we have for the timing marks are, there's a timing mark right here on one of the teeth and a mark on the end of the, it's sort of the rear cover, for the timing case, but it's right in the front, on the front of the head. There's a little tick there. Same with over here. There's a little tick, a little off screen, but it's on the rear there, and a little tick on the cam sprocket. They're both pointing up. They're pointing at where they're supposed to be. What Randy showed me was if you take a paint marker and mark the tick, and then take a paint marker, mark the tick, then mark the belt. Do that for both the front and rear cam sprockets, as well as the crank sprocket. But to put two ticks on the crank sprocket so that you're which mark goes to the crankshaft. Then you can release your pressure off of your tensioner. Once the tension's released, you can pull the belt off, transfer those marks to your new belt, and as long as nothing moves, you can slide it on after you change your water pump. You're still back in time. There are a fixed number of teeth in this belt, and as long as this next belt has the same number of teeth on the inside of the belt, we're laughing. It's going to be the same time. So these are the marks for the camshaft sprockets. As I say, a little mark on the cam sprockets themselves, a mark lining up with that on the belt. I also like to put a little arrow pointing toward the front of the engine. What that helps me remember is that when I put the new timing belt up next to it, notice the lines go all the way to the rear. The new timing belt has to point this way when I'm done. So that way I can line up the front of the timing belt, make a tick only on like the front half, and same here. Once it goes on, as long as I know that front half is pointed this way, I have it in the right orientation. Otherwise, the possibility could arise that I could have it 180 out on the belt itself in orientation, and we're going to be out of time, and we're going to create a boat anchor. Down here, this is what I like to do with the crankshaft. 1 mark, 2 marks, and that way I know that is the crankshaft set of marks versus the camshafts. I have to hand hold the camera to get in here so you can see where that tensioner is. I'm sorry if it's a little shaky. So this bolt here is where it pivots. That idler pulley there is what takes up the slack, but it's pushed against by a little hydraulic and spring-powered plunger down there. There are 2 bolts that hold it to the block. Again, it's really awkward to get in here to see it, so I'm going to pull it off and I'll show it to you up on the, up above. But as I say, I'm just sorry it's kind of hard to get in here to get a good shot, especially with the screen hanging off the side of the camera. So here's that tensioner. That's the piece you were seeing sticking out the back. That plunger is what pushes against the back side of, there's a little bracket here on a swing. That little swinging bracket, it's held tight to keep tension on the timing belt. Now that that's all off, I'm going to set the tensioner aside because we've actually got a new one of these, so I don't need to worry about resetting it. There's a procedure for squishing it down and then putting a little piece of wire through there like a grenade pin. We're not going to bother with that because we have a new one. I might save this and use it for something else because I'm a pack rat, but we'll see. Now theoretically, we should be able to gently pull that off. Slide you off of the cam. Wheel it out of there. Work around the tripod with my hands. Off the front sprocket. Off of the idler. And gently off of the crankshaft. The thing is, there's a shield around this thing on the bottom to protect the crankshaft position sensor. There we are. There's the mark for the front cam sprocket. There's for the rear cam sprocket. Whoop, the camera. And those are our 2 little marks for the crank sprocket. I'm going to transfer those to our new belt, but before we do that, we're going to pull off the tensioner and the idler, and then we've also got to remove the water pump. So here's a shot of the tensioner pulley and the little arm that it swings on. This all comes as an assembly minus this standoff here. This standoff here goes up or butts up against the water pump. This actually threads into a thread on the water pump, holding the arm in place. That shoulder bolt goes up against that standoff and allows it to swing like a hinge. As for the idler pulley, it's actually a little simpler. It has a special shoulder bolt as well, but that shoulder bolt there just helps to locate it and hold it in place on the block. One thing about this though is I noticed it was kind of snug taken out, and I was hoping it wasn't pulling the threads. Thankfully, it was the thread sealant, or the thread locker. So I'll put a little bit of thread locker on it when it goes back together, but yeah, it was a bit of a scary moment there for a minute because I thought I was pulling threads out of the block. And next step is we're going to pull that water pump. This is the water pump pulley right here. Turning it, the bearings don't feel that bad right now, but again, last thing you need to do is do a water pump at 100,000 K, and then have at 120,000 K the water pump start to go, and you don't realize it, and next thing you know it'll let go on you. One thing is though, I need to set up a little bit of cardboard on my floor pointing into the drain bucket. I've already drained the coolant, that I did earlier, but when I pull that water pump, it's still going to be there's still going to be a little bit of coolant left in the block that's going to come this way. I don't want it all over the floor, so I'm just going to set up some cardboard to divert whatever flow happens into the drain bucket. So I have some cardboard set up at the bottom. I'm hoping that'll catch most of it. I know I haven't really been showing as much for the actual bolt removal process for different things. Biggest reason is just that, I mean, you can watch anybody turn a bolt, or you can turn a bolt yourself, but it's more what's inside, which you haven't seen, that is interesting, right? Much like adult children who fail to launch, it is happy in its little home because it has what it wants. Yeah, don't want to press on that. There, let's go. Just make sure we're not pulling on something we shouldn't be. Yeah, there we go. As I say, she's dribbling. Thankfully, the cardboard's catching most of it. Come on. There we go. There. Water pump's off. So then our water pump slides in here. I got to make sure the gasket's in its groove, which it is. And that should slide onto its little dowels, like so. There we are. Start the bolts by hand, and then I'll snug them up. Yeah, it's only got 5 of these little 6 by 1.0 10 mil head bolts. The brackets and engine mount and stuff, that all passes through. So that keeps it nice and snug against the block as well. I want to make sure that this inside of this timing case is nice and dry and clean. So we're going to use a little bit of brake cleaner and blow it off right away, because I don't want to contaminate a new belt. Let's get the tensioner and the idler in place. New idler pulley. Now, in the service manual, I just double checked, and it even says to make sure you put a little bit of thread locker on this. So that's what we're going to do. Like I was figuring before. That goes in the hole. And let's do it the right way around. You know, and I was going to make a joke about putting it in backwards, but now I realize that I'm glad I didn't. Oddly enough, it says in the service manual to thread the bolt in loosely and sort of leave it loose. So we're going to do that. So I put a very thin film of grease on that standoff. There's our bolt. I'm going to put a small dab of thread locker on that bolt as well. And then onto its little mounting spot on the water pump. Okay, there's that. There, that's snug enough. Next step is this tensioner. Again, it sits down behind here, and that's just going to be awkward to get, especially with a camera in the way. I'll put a picture in here of where it sits, and you'll see the little grenade pin that you have to pull once you get the timing belt installed, so that it releases that plunger and then takes up the slack in the timing belt. Next step we have to do is actually installing the timing belt. This idler pulley here is still loose. We'll take and we're going to start from the crankshaft. So I'm going to have to get down in the wheel well to start with that. There are my 2 marks. There we are. Let me get a picture of it. What's nice is the little guard for the the crank sensor is protecting it. Then you'll see where we have our timing mark here. Make sure that stays on. Gotta make sure that he stays in place. There's a nice little tab there on the rear cover. There we are. You see we have that timing mark is now lined up on that one. I have to weasel it around behind the little, there's a little lip on the back side there that, there we go. All right, I think we're golden with that. Now I can finish tightening up. Finish tightening up that idler. We should be able to release the grenade pin, and we're in time. And that gets tightened down. Double check our timing marks. That one's happy. That one down there is happy right there. And crankshaft is still where it should be. We are now ready to pull the grenade pin. It's just in an awkward spot. There we are. Engine is now timed. So now really it's just a matter of reassembling this thing. I may just do a quick, I may just do a fast forward of this front of this engine going back together. First thing to go back in is the upper engine mount. The 3 bolts. In goes the upper engine mount, and that one ugly bolt I cleaned up and smeared a little bit of goo. There, make sure that's started by hand first before you put the power to it. Sorry about the shake. Reattach the ground strap. It's amazing how much you need grounds. They are not extraneous, or superfluous, I should say. So now that the engine has its mount again, we can remove the floor jack. So now I'm going to go down bottom and start putting the lower cover on first, because you have to start with it. Very important. Don't forget this washer here. That sits on the front of the crankshaft snout, right by the timing belt, just like so. Now it's time for the rear cover. Make sure that little seal on the back side is all the way around and in place. There's a little tab on top of the lower cover that slides into a slot on the upper cover. We can start all our bolts. Or drop them. Okay, once that's in place, we can put our wiring harness back in its little channel to hold it. So that's back in its little hole. All right, front upper timing cover. Same sort of thing. Make sure the little weather seal is in place. Next step is serpentine belt tensioner and idler. Just going to set it there. I have to go underneath to get the bolt started, but hopefully you get a decent view from there of what's happening. The view isn't quite as clear from the bottom here, but I think that's it. So that's got the upper and lower bolt for the upper bolt there, and then there's the lower bolt for the tensioner. Now that the tensioner is back in place, we don't need the extra room. We can now put our power steering pump and reservoir back in location. Reservoir sits in a little dovetail mount inside the fender well. And our pump uses two M8 bolts, 12 millimeter head. Okay, one. That's kind of a nice ring to it. Kind of a nice reverb. All right. One bolt I took out that I didn't actually show earlier was there's a clip back here that holds the power steering line in place. To get a little bit extra clearance, I removed this little bolt that holds that bracket to the valve cover. All right, next step is get the crankshaft dampener on. Make sure that little washer's in there for the serpent or the timing belt itself. Line up our keyway. Again, what's nice with these Hondas is they slide right on. It's just the bolt that's ridiculously tight. Come on, get started. Kind of amusing in the service information it says specifically do not use an impact wrench. Now we'll have to set up the bar. I have to set the special tool in the bar because we have to tighten this to 47 foot-pounds plus 60 degrees. Alright, so I have the tool with the breaker bar in it wedged up against the CV axle for a stop, and I'm using the block here again just because of the length of the extension. We have to start by making it 47 foot-pounds. There we go, there's 47. And then we have to add another 60 degrees. For that, I don't feel like messing around. Bertha comes out again. Helps if you're going the right way. There we go. 60 degrees. That is not coming out. Well, not on its own anyway. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with all the routing of the belt because that was a bit of a nuisance. But just bring it back in just for the final step here. Keep my fingers out of it because that'll bite you if you're not careful. Oh, my little guy's in his little car carrier there. He's not happy. There. He's in his bike trailer. That's where I keep him hidden away while I'm sometimes working in the shop to keep him out of trouble. There we go. So, belt's on. Just have to put the tire on, fill it with coolant, and I'm going to give it an oil change too. Okay, so we're pretty much done. Got the serpentine belt on, tires on and torqued to 80 foot-pounds on the lug nuts. We're on the ground. The skid shield's back up underneath, and refilled with coolant, brand new coolant. We did an oil change at the same time. So really, we're down to the moment of truth, otherwise known as brown trousers time. So this is when I find out whether or not my in-laws disown me. Well, it's running and I have no check engine light and there was no earth-shattering kaboom, so I'll take that as a success. Timing belt out, timing belt in, new water pump, and there was no earth-shattering kaboom. So yeah, thankful that worked out well. Again, certain things take a little bit of fiddling, especially in the tight quarters. I'm hoping that I got across enough of what could be of use for somebody who's wishing to tear one apart, or if you're looking at a used Honda that's got, say, 100,000 K, 110, well, whatever, 62, 65,000 miles, something like that, or any multiples of that, and it needs a timing belt and you're worried about buying it because it needs a timing belt, don't worry about it. If you're even remotely mechanically inclined and you have some basic tools, the only special tool you might need is the crankshaft dampener holding tool, and you can get them on Amazon for pretty cheap. So yeah, you've seen how it's done even in a home shop on jack stands. It's really not that hard if you just take your time and keep your wits about you. So hopefully it was helpful to somebody. Anyway, for what it's worth, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and yeah, I appreciate y'all who click the little button and send me comments. It's fun to hear from you. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, see you next time.